5 years after the human withdrawal protocol had been signed, the galaxy stood at the edge of a darkness so complete that even the most pessimistic observers had not predicted its scope. President William Grant sat in his office surrounded by reports that documented the death of civilizations and the collapse of everything that had once made the universe a place of wonder and cooperation between species. The final collapse was accelerating beyond anyone's ability to track or understand. The Korthak hegemony, which had consumed most of the civilizations in their region, was now fragmenting internally as their conquered territories rebelled simultaneously, but the rebels lacked the knowledge or infrastructure to govern themselves. After decades of occupation and destruction, anarchy spread across hundreds of star systems as former slaves turned into warlords fighting over the ruins of dead empires. Admiral Ryan Torres had been conducting reconnaissance missions deep into what had once been civilized space, and each report he filed painted a picture of devastation that seemed impossible to believe. His latest mission had taken him to the Magellanic Reach, where the silicon-based architects had built some of the most beautiful structures in the known galaxy. They sent us a final message before sealing their borders permanently. Torres reported to the emergency session of Earth's government. The architects are entering technological stasis and cutting all contact with the rest of the galaxy. They said they can no longer risk contamination from the chaos that has consumed everything else. The loss of the architects meant that the last truly advanced civilization had given up on the possibility of galactic recovery. Their decision to isolate themselves permanently was like watching the final light go out in a universe that was descending into permanent darkness. Dr. Benjamin Taylor had spent years documenting the historical significance of what was happening, but his analysis revealed something that terrified even those who thought they understood the scope of the disaster. Humanity had served as more than just peacekeepers or traders in galactic civilization. They had been the social glue that held everything together through their unique combination of empathy, adaptability, and collaborative instinct. No other species possessed this combination of traits at the scale necessary to maintain galactic stability, Taylor explained to President Grant during a private briefing. For over 2 centuries, humans served as translators not just of language but of perspective and need between species that could not understand each other without human mediation. The psychological impact documented by Dr. Amy Foster had reached levels that defied comprehension. Entire species were experiencing what she called trust syndrome, where they became incapable of cooperating with anyone, including members of their own race. The collaborative spirit that humans had fostered was being replaced by a dark age of isolation and paranoia that showed no signs of ending. Captain Nicole Adams had continued her humanitarian missions, despite knowing that each successful rescue represented a tiny drop of hope in an ocean of despair. Her latest mission had brought back refugees from the former Trilarian homeworld, where she had witnessed the complete breakdown of one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. They were burning their own libraries and destroying art that had existed for thousands of years, she told the secret meeting of Never Again movement leaders. The survivors told me they no longer believed in beauty or creativity because those things reminded them of the cooperation with other species that had failed them. The economic collapse had reached its logical conclusion, with interstellar trade falling to virtually zero in most regions. Dr. Nathan Price estimated that technological advancement had been set back by centuries in areas that survived the warfare, while vast regions had lost spacefaring capability entirely. Some worlds were reverting to subsistence agriculture, after the complex systems that had supported their populations collapsed completely. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Parker's underground networks had managed to save perhaps 100,000 beings over 5 years of dangerous rescue operations. But for every person they saved, millions more died from warfare, disease, starvation, or simple despair as their civilizations crumbled around them. We are fighting to save individuals while entire species disappear, Parker told Elena Rodriguez as they planned their final major rescue mission. It feels like trying to empty the ocean with a bucket while the dam breaks and floods everything we have worked to protect. Elena had become the unofficial leader of the Never Again movement, which was gaining support as more humans learned about the true scope of the galactic catastrophe. Public opinion was shifting as images of the disaster leaked through underground networks and reached Earth's population, despite government efforts to control information. The political landscape on Earth changed dramatically when Admiral Torres returned from his most dangerous reconnaissance mission with evidence that could not be hidden from the public. His ships had documented the complete extinction of the Zephyrian species and brought back recordings of the final transmissions from their last surviving colony. We tried to rebuild after the humans left us, but we could not remember how to work. Together, without their guidance, came the voice of the last Zephyrian elder through the static-filled recording. Our species survived for 10,000 years, but we could not survive 5 years without the humans who taught us that cooperation was possible. President Grant faced massive protests as the Never Again movement organized demonstrations in every major city on Earth. The protesters carried images of extinct civilizations and signs, demanding that humanity take responsibility for the catastrophe they had helped to create. Senator Marcus Webb's Terra First Party was losing support as economic problems on Earth worsened and people connected their suffering to the galactic isolation policy. Dr. Lisa Chen finally received authorization to provide emergency medical assistance to refugee groups after public pressure forced changes in the Humanity Protection Act. But when she tried to re-establish contact with her former colleagues across the galaxy, she found that most of them were dead, and the research facilities they had worked in were destroyed or abandoned. I spent 20 years building relationships with alien doctors and researchers across dozens of worlds, she told the government committee investigating the withdrawal policy. Now I am trying to rebuild that network, but there is almost nobody left to contact because we waited too long to offer help. The moment of ultimate reckoning came when the Etherian delegation that had preserved knowledge from 17 extinct civilizations requested a final meeting with Earth's leadership. Their leader was the same being who had offered humanity the gift of preserved knowledge years earlier, and his message carried the weight of everything that had been lost. We have completed our mission of preserving what we could from the civilizations that died after humanity withdrew from galactic affairs, the Etherian said through the translation device. We offer this knowledge freely to humanity because you were once the species that helped others preserve and share their greatest achievements. We hope that someday you will choose to honor what was lost by ensuring that such a tragedy never happens again. The data crystals contained not just scientific and technical knowledge, but art, literature, music, and philosophy from species that no longer existed anywhere in the universe. It was like being offered the combined wisdom of entire civilizations that had been reduced to memory, because humanity had chosen isolation over engagement with the galaxy they had helped to build. President Grant faced 3 possible choices that would determine the future of both humanity and whatever remained of galactic civilization. He could commit everything to a massive rescue effort that might save some of the remaining species, but would require decades of work and millions of human lives. He could choose selective intervention to save what was possible without overextending Earth's resources. Or he could accept the collapse as irreversible and establish Earth as a memorial to lost civilizations, while maintaining isolation to prevent future disasters. As Grant looked at the data crystals containing the last traces of extinct species, he understood that this decision would define not just humanity's future, but their moral legacy in a universe where they had once been the force that held everything together. The choice was no longer about policy or politics, but about whether humans could live with themselves knowing what their withdrawal had cost the galaxy. The weight of 17 extinct civilizations pressed down on Earth's leaders as they faced the most important decision in human history. They had learned too late that isolation was not safety, but abandonment, and that their unique role in galactic civilization could not be replaced by any other species. Now they had to decide whether redemption was possible, or if they would spend the rest of their existence as the species that had let the universe die. 3 years had passed since humanity withdrew from galactic affairs and the universe had become a place of darkness that few would recognize from the peaceful civilization it had once been. Dr. Benjamin Taylor worked day and night documenting the collapse of entire species and cultures for the historical record, because he understood that future generations needed to know what had been lost when Earth turned its back on the galaxy. The Korthak hegemony had grown into a massive war machine that consumed everything in its path like a disease spreading through healthy tissue. They had absorbed or completely destroyed 12 former civilizations, and their armies used biological weapons that violated every treaty and moral principle that had once governed galactic warfare. Without human peacekeepers to enforce the old agreements, there was nothing to stop them from using the most terrible weapons imaginable against defenseless populations. Major Patricia Evans spent her days reading intelligence reports that painted a picture of horror spreading across the galaxy. Her job was to track developments in alien space so that Earth's government could prepare for any threats that might eventually reach human territory. But the reports she filed each week told a story of such complete devastation that she sometimes wondered if there would be anything left of galactic civilization by the time the collapse finally reached its end. The Trilarian homeworld fell to internal revolution last week, she reported to General Brooks during their regular briefing. The species that gave us art and philosophy for over 1,000 years tore itself apart in civil war. Their great libraries are burning and centuries of cultural achievement are being destroyed by their own people, who have lost all hope for peaceful cooperation. Brooks had seen this pattern repeated dozens of times over the past 3 years as species after species fell into chaos and self-destruction. The optimistic worldview that humans had helped foster throughout the galaxy was being replaced by despair and hatred as alien races lost faith in the possibility of working together to solve problems. Captain Nicole Adams had left the official military after the withdrawal to lead a small group of ships that smuggled humanitarian supplies to refugee camps. Her organization saved thousands of lives, but they were fighting against disasters that killed millions. The scale of suffering had grown so massive that even heroic efforts barely made a difference in the face of complete civilizational collapse. "We managed to evacuate the last Etherian survivors from their dying world," she told Lieutenant Colonel Steve Parker during one of their coordination meetings. "Their terraforming project failed completely, and the atmosphere became toxic without human expertise to maintain the systems. We saved about 3,000 people, but there were millions more who died before we could reach them." The Etherians had been one of the most gentle and artistic species in the galaxy, who had never harmed any other race in their entire recorded history. Now they were almost extinct, because they had depended on human protection and environmental expertise that was no longer available to them. Their beautiful crystal cities lay empty under a poisonous sky, while the few survivors lived in crowded refugee ships with no world to call home. Dr. Amy Foster's research into the psychological impact of the human withdrawal had revealed disturbing patterns that went far beyond what anyone had expected. Species that had worked closely with humans for generations were not just losing the practical benefits of cooperation, but were actually becoming incapable of trust and collaboration even among their own kind. The collaborative mindset that humans helped develop throughout the galaxy is disappearing completely, she explained to a secret meeting of government officials who were beginning to question the withdrawal policy. Entire species are experiencing mass psychological breakdown because they cannot adapt to a universe where cooperation and mutual aid are no longer possible. The Deltarian species provided the most tragic example of what happened to peaceful races when human protection was removed. Their population had fallen from 12 billion to fewer than 100 million in just 3 years as the Korthak armies hunted them across space like animals. The Deltarians had never developed weapons because they had always relied on human military forces to protect them from aggressive neighbors. Technology was regressing across the galaxy as the knowledge and innovation that humans had provided for centuries disappeared. The great space elevators on 6 worlds had collapsed because nobody understood how to maintain the human-designed support systems. Interstellar communication networks were operating at less than 30% efficiency as relay stations failed, without proper maintenance. Dr. Lisa Chen tried to help from Earth, but the laws against providing aid to alien species made it impossible for her to share even basic technical information that could save lives. She watched helplessly as medical disasters spread across space because alien doctors lacked the human knowledge needed to treat diseases that affected multiple species. "I could prevent the plague outbreak on Rigel 4 with a simple chemical formula," she told Elena Rodriguez during one of their private conversations. "But if I transmit that information to their doctors, I could be sent to prison for violating the Humanity Protection Act. So I have to watch billions of beings die from a disease I know how to cure." Admiral Ryan Torres had been authorized to conduct reconnaissance missions to gather intelligence about conditions in alien space. What he found when his ships returned from these dangerous journeys shocked even the military leaders who thought they understood how bad the situation had become. Entire star clusters where spacefaring civilization had existed for thousands of years were now dark and empty with no signs of organized life remaining. We found massive graveyards of abandoned ships and space stations drifting through systems that used to be major trade centers, he reported to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Some areas have reverted to pre-industrial technology, and others show no signs of intelligent life at all. It is like someone turned off the lights across half the galaxy. The economic data compiled by Dr. Nathan Price showed that interstellar trade had fallen to less than 5% of what it had been before the human withdrawal. Technological advancement had stopped completely in most regions, while some areas were actually losing knowledge as educational systems collapsed and libraries were destroyed in the ongoing warfare. On Earth, the political situation was changing. As evidence of the galactic catastrophe reached the general population, despite government efforts to control the flow of information, the Never Again movement led by former officials like Elena Rodriguez and retired military officers like Commander Jake Morrison was gaining support as people learned about the scale of death and suffering that had followed humanity's decision to isolate itself. President Grant faced the most difficult decision in human history, as intelligence reports suggested that immediate massive intervention might still be able to save some civilizations and prevent total galactic collapse. But such an effort would require committing virtually all of humanity's resources to a rescue mission that could take decades and cost millions of human lives with no guarantee of success. Senator Marcus Webb and the Terra First Movement argued that intervening now would only delay the inevitable, while putting humanity at risk of being destroyed along with the rest of galactic civilization. They pointed out that many species now actively resented humans and might turn hostile if rescue efforts failed to save them from the disasters they blamed on human abandonment. The climax came when a small group of Etherian survivors led by beings that Captain Adams had saved arrived at Earth's borders. They did not come as refugees seeking shelter, but as a delegation carrying the most precious cargo imaginable. In their ships, they had preserved the combined scientific and cultural knowledge of 17 extinct civilizations that they had managed to save during their escape from their dying world. Their leader spoke to Earth's government through a translation device with words that carried the weight of entire lost civilizations. We do not ask for rescue or assistance because we understand that you have chosen isolation to protect your own people. We ask only that you accept this gift of knowledge from the species that died after you left us. Remember what was lost and ensure that it never happens again. The delegation offered humanity access to scientific discoveries and cultural achievements that represented thousands of years of development by species that no longer existed. They asked for nothing in return, except that humans would preserve this knowledge and learn from the tragedy that had destroyed so much of what had made galactic civilization beautiful and worth preserving. As Earth's leaders looked at the data, crystals containing the last traces of extinct civilizations, they faced a choice that would define humanity's future and determine whether anything could be saved from the catastrophe they had helped to create. 1 year after the human withdrawal protocol had been signed, the galaxy looked nothing like the peaceful collection of civilizations it had been before. General Kevin Brooks sat in his office reading intelligence reports that painted a picture of complete chaos spreading across known space. He had warned President Grant about the consequences of pulling back all human forces, but nobody in government had wanted to listen to his predictions about cascading disasters. The Zephyrian Empire no longer existed as a single entity. What had once been a proud civilization spanning dozens of star systems was now broken into small territories controlled by different warlords who fought each other as much as they fought the Korthak invaders. Without human mediators to negotiate ceasefires or peace agreements, the violence just continued to spread, as each victory encouraged more groups to try solving their problems through warfare. Dr. Amy Foster had been studying the psychological impact of the human withdrawal on alien species, and her findings were deeply disturbing. Many races that had worked closely with humans for generations were experiencing what she called trust syndrome, where they became unable to cooperate even with members of their own species. The collaborative and hopeful attitude that humans had encouraged throughout the galaxy was being replaced by suspicion and fear. The Trilarian species is falling apart from the inside, she explained to General Brooks during one of their briefings. They had worked with human artists and philosophers for over a century and developed a very optimistic view of what different species could accomplish together. Now that humans are gone, they have lost faith in cooperation itself, and their society is splitting into violent factions. Brooks looked at the reports scattered across his desk, showing similar patterns on dozens of worlds. Species that had seemed stable and peaceful while working with humans were now experiencing civil wars and social breakdown. The human influence had been like invisible glue holding galactic civilization together, and without it, everything was coming apart. Captain Ryan Torres had been promoted to admiral after several senior officers retired in protest over the withdrawal policy. His new position gave him access to long-range sensor data that showed the true scope of the disaster spreading across the galaxy. Entire sectors that had been peaceful trading regions were now dark zones where no ships traveled because of piracy and warfare. The Red Nebula Syndicate has taken control of the Vega trade routes, his intelligence officer reported during their daily briefing. They are enslaving entire colonies and selling the population to whoever will pay for workers. This would never have been possible when human patrol fleets were maintaining order in that region. Ryan remembered flying through the Vega sector just 2 years earlier when it had been full of merchant ships from dozens of species trading peacefully under the protection of human peacekeeping forces. Now it was a lawless wasteland where criminal organizations did whatever they wanted because nobody had the power or will to stop them. The economic collapse that Dr. Nathan Price had predicted was proving even worse than his most pessimistic models. The Andorian Mining Consortium, which had been one of the largest employers in 3 sectors, had gone completely bankrupt when they lost access to human financial networks. Millions of workers from different species found themselves unemployed, with no way to travel home because the transportation systems had also collapsed. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Parker was still running his underground network, trying to provide aid to refugee groups, but the scale of need had grown beyond anything they could handle. His organization managed to save a few thousand beings each month, while billions suffered from the spreading chaos across the galaxy. The official human aid programs that had once helped entire civilizations were gone, and nothing had replaced them. "We got another group of Etherian children out of the war zone this week," he told Elena Rodriguez during one of their secret meetings. But their terraforming project on New Genesis completely failed, and their atmosphere is becoming toxic. "We saved 50 kids, but there were thousands more we could not reach in time." Elena had been trying to document the disasters for future historians, but the reports were so terrible that she sometimes had trouble believing what she was reading. The peaceful Deltarian species that had never developed weapons was down to less than 10% of their original population. The Korthak armies had overrun their worlds, and most of the survivors were scattered refugees hiding in asteroid fields or abandoned space stations. Dr. Lisa Chen received a final transmission from research station Kepler Prime before it went completely dark. Her friend Dr. Xylan managed to send one last message before the station's power systems failed completely and left the remaining scientists stranded in space with no way to maintain life support or call for rescue. "Dr. Chen, we tried to keep the medical research going after everyone else left, but we do not have the knowledge to maintain the human-designed equipment," the message said. "The plague samples we were studying have gotten loose in the lower levels, and we cannot contain them without the human safety protocols. If anyone ever finds this message, please know that we tried to continue the work you started." The plague that escaped from Kepler Prime spread to 3 nearby systems before anyone realized what was happening. Without the human medical expertise that had been available for 2 centuries, the alien doctors had no idea how to treat the new disease or prevent it from spreading further. Entire planets were quarantined, but the isolation just made the suffering worse as food and medical supplies ran out. On Earth, the population was beginning to experience what psychologists called isolation syndrome. Despite all the Terra First propaganda about human superiority and the benefits of isolation, many people felt a deep sadness about losing contact with the diverse galaxy they had been part of for generations. Suicide rates climbed as young people grew up knowing only Earth and its colonies, instead of the rich variety of species and cultures their parents had worked with. President Grant faced growing pressure as news of the galactic disasters leaked through underground networks and reached Earth's population. The images of burning worlds and refugee camps filled with dying alien children were hard to ignore, even for people who supported the withdrawal policy. Senator Webb's Terra First Party was still popular, but cracks were starting to show as the economic problems on Earth got worse. The voters are asking questions about whether we made the right choice, Grant's chief of staff told him during a private meeting. The unemployment rate is up 20% since we cut off galactic trade, and people are starting to connect that with the withdrawal decision. But Webb and his supporters argued that short-term economic problems were better than the risk of more terrorist attacks like the one that destroyed Luna Colony. They pointed to the violence spreading across the galaxy as proof that aliens were naturally aggressive and that humans were better off staying away from all of them. The technology regression that General Brooks had warned about was also becoming visible. Many species had become dependent on human innovation and problem-solving approaches over the past 2 centuries. The Crystalline Collective, who were master engineers responsible for building most of the galaxy's space stations, revealed that they had relied on human creativity to solve complex design challenges for over 100 years. Without human input, their new construction projects were failing catastrophically. Admiral Torres watched his long-range sensors as distress signals multiplied across known space. His patrol ships in the Sol system picked up hundreds of emergency transmissions every day from species begging for help that would never come. The human government had made it clear that they would not respond to any alien requests for assistance, no matter how desperate the situation became. As the first anniversary of the withdrawal approached, it was clear that the galaxy had reached a point where the damage might be permanent. Civilizations that had existed for thousands of years were disappearing completely, and the knowledge and culture they represented was being lost forever. The collaborative spirit that humans had fostered throughout the galaxy was being replaced by a dark age of isolation and warfare that showed no signs of ending. 6 months had passed since President William Grant announced the human withdrawal protocol, and the galaxy was already falling apart. Dr. Lisa Chen sat in her new office on Earth reading desperate messages from her alien colleagues who were still trapped in the chaos she had been forced to abandon. The research station Kepler Prime, where she had worked for 5 years, was slowly shutting down as each species recalled their scientists and stopped sending funding for joint projects. The first message came from Dr. Xylan, who was a crystalline being that she had worked with on finding cures for cross-species diseases. His translated words appeared on her screen in basic English, but she could feel the desperation behind them. Dr. Chen, the station is losing power because the Trellarian engineers left last week, and we do not know how to fix their systems. 3. Different species are getting sick because we cannot maintain the medical labs without human knowledge of how to operate the equipment. Lisa tried to send back helpful information, but Earth's new laws made it illegal for her to provide any technical assistance to alien governments or organizations. Senator Marcus Webb's Terra First Party had passed the Humanity Protection Act, which made it a serious crime to help non-human entities in any way. She could be sent to prison for just answering Dr. Xylan's questions about basic medical procedures. Admiral Claire Davis was having her own problems trying to manage the complete withdrawal of human forces from across the galaxy. Her office had become a constant stream of reports about disasters that were happening everywhere. Humans had been providing peacekeeping or humanitarian services. The Zephyrian and Korthak War had exploded just hours after Commander Jake Morrison pulled his ships back to human space, and now it was spreading to neighboring star systems. The economic reports are the worst part, Dr. Nathan Price told Claire during their morning briefing. He had been studying the galactic market collapse that started when humans pulled out of all their trade agreements and banking partnerships. The Centauri credit has lost 60% of its value in 3 weeks because it was backed by Earth's economic stability. Entire star systems that depended on human trade routes are facing complete economic collapse. Claire looked at the star maps covering her office walls, where red markers showed conflict zones and yellow markers showed areas where human forces had been withdrawn. Every day, more red markers appeared as the violence spread, and more yellow. Areas turned red when local conflicts erupted without human peacekeepers to maintain order. Captain, Ryan Torres had been reassigned to patrol duties in the Sol system after spending years exploring unknown regions and providing aid to species that needed help. His ship now flew boring circles around Earth's outer planets while his crew grew, more frustrated every day. They had trained for exploration and rescue missions, but now they were forbidden from responding to the distress signals that filled their communication channels. "Sir, we are receiving another emergency transmission from the Deltarian home system," his communications officer reported during their routine patrol. "Their entire species is facing extinction because of the war spreading into their territory, but they have no weapons or military to defend themselves." Ryan clenched his fists as he listened to the desperate pleas for help coming through the ship's speakers. The Deltarians were one of the most peaceful species in the galaxy, who had never developed weapons because they had always relied on human protection. Now they were defenseless against the advancing Korthak war fleets that were conquering everything in their path. "Log the message and file it with Earth Command," Ryan said, even though he knew nothing would be done about it. Earth's new policy was clear about not getting involved in alien conflicts, even when it meant watching peaceful species get wiped out completely. On Earth itself, the changes were becoming visible as the economic benefits of galactic trade disappeared overnight. Dr. Price's economic models had predicted exactly what was happening, but nobody in government wanted to listen to warnings about the consequences of isolation. Unemployment was rising as companies that had built their businesses on interstellar trade shut down or moved their operations to other human colonies. Elena Rodriguez had resigned from her position as a diplomatic liaison rather than participate in abandoning the alien species she had worked with for years. She now worked in secret, trying to organize humanitarian aid for refugee groups, but the scale of need was far beyond what any private organization could handle. The official government programs that had once helped billions of beings across the galaxy were gone, and nothing had replaced them. "We managed to send medical supplies to 3 refugee camps this month," she told Lieutenant Colonel Steve Parker during one of their underground network meetings. "But there are over 400 camps that need help, and we do not have the resources to reach even a small fraction of them." Steve had been organizing similar networks among military personnel who disagreed with the withdrawal policy. Many soldiers and officers felt ashamed about abandoning their alien allies and were secretly trying to provide whatever help they could manage. But their efforts were tiny compared to what was needed, and they had to be very careful not to get caught breaking Earth's new laws. The refugee crisis hit human space when the first Deltarian ships arrived at the border, seeking sanctuary from the advancing Korthak armies. President Grant faced enormous pressure from Senator Webb's party to turn away all alien refugees and maintain strict isolation. The images of desperate families in damaged ships begging for safety spread across Earth's news networks, but the EI Terra First movement argued that helping them would encourage more aliens to seek human protection. "We cannot become the shelter for every species that gets into trouble," Senator Webb declared during a heated debate in Congress. "Humanity tried to be the galaxy's police force for 200 years, and all we got was terrorism attacks and dead colonists. It is time to protect our own people first and let other species solve their own problems." But many humans were beginning to question whether the withdrawal had been the right choice. The news reports from across the galaxy painted a picture of spreading chaos and suffering that seemed to follow directly from humanity's decision to abandon their galactic responsibilities. Economic problems on Earth were getting worse as trade relationships built over centuries collapsed overnight. Dr. Chen received more desperate messages every day from colleagues who had become friends over years of working together. Research. Projects that could have saved millions of lives were being abandoned as the joint facilities shut down. The terraforming project on New Genesis that was supposed to create a garden world for the Etherian species was failing without human agricultural expertise and environmental management. "The atmospheric processors are breaking down because we do not understand the human-designed control systems," came another message from the project site. "If we cannot fix them soon, the entire planet will become toxic and uninhabitable for our species." The worst part for Lisa was knowing that she had the knowledge to help, but was forbidden by her own government from sharing it. Every day she did not respond to these calls for help meant that more beings would suffer or die from problems that she could easily solve if she were still allowed to work with alien species. As the months passed, the pattern became clear to anyone paying attention. The galaxy had been more dependent on human involvement than anyone had realized, not just for military protection and economic stability, but for the basic problem-solving abilities that humans brought to complex situations involving multiple species with different needs and perspectives. Without that human influence holding things together, the entire structure of galactic civilization was starting to collapse. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship watching the stars burn in the distance. The Zephyrian and Korthak fleets faced each other across empty space like two angry animals ready to fight. 3 star systems had already fallen to their war, and billions of people were running for their lives across the galaxy. Jake had been trying to keep peace between these two alien races for 6 months now, but every day brought them closer to total war. The message came through on his communication system with the familiar voice of Admiral Claire Davis back on Earth. She sounded tired when she spoke, which worried Jake more than the burning planets on his scanner. Claire had been his mentor for 20 years, and he had never heard her sound so defeated before. "Jake, you need to come home right now," she said, through the static-filled connection. "President Grant is calling back all human forces from alien space. The Terra First movement won the vote yesterday, and we have 6 months to pull everyone back to human territory." Jake felt his heart sink into his stomach as he looked at his crew. Lieutenant Ryan Torres was checking weapon systems while Dr. Lisa Chen worked on her medical supplies for the refugee camps. These people had dedicated their lives to helping other species across the galaxy, and now they were being told to abandon everything they had worked for. "Admiral, what about the peace talks?" Jake asked, even though he already knew the answer. The Zephyrians and Korthaks were finally starting to listen to each other. If we leave now, they will destroy each other and take half the galaxy with them. Claire was quiet for a long moment, and Jake could hear other voices arguing in the background, on Earth. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Senator Marcus Webb convinced the people that we have sacrificed enough human lives for alien problems. The attack on Luna Colony killed 3,000 of our people. Jake and the voters want revenge, or at least safety." The Luna Colony attack had been carried out by a small group of crazy Vraxian terrorists who thought humans were taking over their territory. Most Vraxians had said the attack was wrong, and many of their leaders had apologized publicly. But Senator Webb and his Terra First Party used the fear and anger to gain power on Earth. They promised to bring all humans home and close the borders to alien contact. Dr. Chen looked up from her medical station with tears in her eyes. She had been working with alien doctors on Research Station Kepler Prime for 5 years, studying diseases that affected multiple species. Her work had saved millions of lives across the galaxy, but now all of that would end. "Commander, the Etherian refugees in Camp 7 are mostly children who lost their parents when their world was attacked. What am I supposed to tell them when we leave?" Jake did not have an answer for her because he did not understand it himself. Humanity had been part of the Galactic Coalition for almost 200 years. Human colonies existed in dozens of star systems, and their people had become the peacekeepers and problem solvers that other species relied on. When conflicts arose between alien races, they called for human mediators because humans seemed to understand how to make different species work together. The communication system buzzed again, and this time it was Elena Rodriguez calling from the Zephyrian capital ship. She had been working as a diplomat between the two warring species and had finally gotten them to agree to meet for peace talks next week. Her voice was excited when she spoke, which made Jake feel even worse about the news he had to give her. "Commander Morrison, the Zephyrian Emperor, just agreed to consider giving back the mining rights on Kepler 7 if the Korthaks will stop attacking their supply ships. This could be the breakthrough we have been working toward for months." Jake closed his eyes and tried to find the right words to tell Elena that all her work was about to be thrown away. "Elena, I just got orders from Earth. We are pulling out of all alien conflicts and returning to human space within 6 months. President Grant signed the Human Withdrawal Protocol an hour ago." The silence on the communication line stretched for almost a full minute before Elena responded. When she spoke, her voice was flat and emotionless, like she was reading a report instead of talking about the end of everything she believed in. Commander, does Earth understand what will happen when we leave? These two species have been fighting for 300 years, and we are the only thing keeping them from total war. On his scanner, Jake could see more ships arriving in the combat zone every hour. Both the Zephyrian Empire and Korthak Hegemony were bringing in their biggest warships and most dangerous weapons. Without human peacekeepers to maintain the ceasefire, these fleets would start shooting within days of the withdrawal announcement. Captain Ryan Torres had been listening to the communications, and now he stepped forward with a grim expression on his face. Sir, I have been tracking ship movements across this sector for the past week. If fighting breaks out here, it will spread to at least 12 star systems. The refugee crisis alone could kill billions of people. Jake knew Ryan was right, but there was nothing they could do about it now. The decision had been made on Earth by people who were scared and angry about the Luna colony attack. They wanted to protect human lives by bringing everyone home, but they did not understand that this decision would cause more death than any terrorist attack ever could. Dr. Chen was still working on her medical supplies, but Jake could see that she was just keeping her hands busy while her mind processed what was happening. She had alien friends on dozens of worlds who depended on human medical knowledge to treat diseases that their own doctors could not handle. Without human help, many species would face medical disasters within months. The next few hours passed, in a blur of emergency communications and preparation orders. Jake had to coordinate the withdrawal of human forces from 17 different conflict zones, while trying to maintain some kind of order until the last moment. Every alien leader he spoke to reacted with shock and disbelief when they learned that humans were abandoning their responsibilities to the galaxy. As Jake watched the stars burn in the distance, he wondered if Earth truly understood what they were doing. Humanity had become the backbone of galactic civilization, not through conquest or force, but by being the species that could bring others together. Now they were walking away from that responsibility, and Jake feared that the galaxy would never recover from what was about to happen.